Tyler Baron, who just on the surface you would have said is probably Tennessee's biggest loss in the transfer portal on the surface, maybe. We will discuss that right now as he is now flipped from Ole Miss to Louisville. I don't think this is what the transfer portal was supposed to be. How many snaps did he play for Ole Miss?
Oh, he played zero.
Absolutely none. Flipping from Ole Miss to Louisville is a sign that you want to get more money, and I would argue a drop down a little bit in talent. He could be more successful there, although, as Jimmy said, it's probably just about the money. That leads us to what the H? And it's brought to you by Don Self, your State Farm agent in the Chattanooga area. What the H?
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
It sounds crazy to say this. I think I think Tennessee might be better off without Tyler Baron. And if you can, give me his stats first, because I want to be fair to the player and I want to be fair to everybody listening when I give you my opinion, because he's a solid player. I don't think there's any question. Give me his stats last year and how he's progressed into being one of, I wouldn't say elite defensive ends, but one of the better defensive ends in the SEC.
So last year, Tyler Baron, it was his first full year starting, because for those who don't remember, he actually in 2021 lost his starting job to Byron Young and was a backup to Byron Young for 2 years. So last year he becomes a full-time starter. He has 10.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 28 total tackles, 16 of which were solo, 2 pass deflections, a fumble recovery for a touchdown. And most of us agree that that 6 sacks could have been 10 if people had, to be fair to him, if refs had not missed so many holding calls on Tyler Baron this year, which there were a lot of. And I just think it was bad luck, quite honestly, with missed holding calls. But yeah, so those are his numbers.
Right. Well, we could discuss officiating for a long time. I'm going to ask you this. I want to give you a second to think about it. Is Tennessee at the point at their roster that they can make decisions based off intangibles? In other words, as Jimmy Haun said earlier on the program, by the way, we're live at 10 a.m. weekdays, so love for you to listen to the whole program instead of just the videos, if that's what you're listening to now. Jimmy said Tyler Baron didn't get along with the coaching staff. Is Tennessee to the point where they can make personnel decisions based off intangibles and not just talent? That's the question I want to ask you, and it's brought to you by Don Self, your State Farm agent in the Chattanooga area, Collegedale and Ooltewah. Call 423-396-2126. The number's right below. Or go to donself.net. Over 40 years, they built their business and reputation in taking care of their customers. Your State Farm agent. Customer service still matters. I know you're shopping for quotes, but what happens when you send in that claim? That's donself, donself.net. So are they at that point where you don't have to bend a little bit? Like, I'll use the James Banks situation. Tennessee was starting, their coaching staff was starting to catch some heat. They knew James Banks was a special player. So special players headed by James Banks got a little bit of leeway in terms of discipline. I can remember one time when James Banks was told to run the field during practice, and instead, I've told you this before, he just stood on the sideline and did deep knee or air squats is what you would call them. So my question for you is, if Tennessee had to give a little bit because there was some pressure on them at the time, Tennessee has probably had to give a little bit with Tyler Baron to get the 2023 season out of him. Are they past the point where they have to give? Because at some point, if you give too much leeway to too many players, it destroys your locker room chemistry. So are they at that point with their roster where they can say, hey, you may be really good? I'm talking like James Pierce had an off-the-field incident where you could say, I'm sorry, this isn't working out. You're a great player, but you have to go. Are they at that point? or are they a ways away from there?
Depends on the position. And I think edge rusher, they're easily at that point. I mean, they are so easily at that point at edge rusher. They're so deep at edge rusher, guys, that we talked about yesterday. Tennessee is about to become edge rusher U. They don't just have Tyler Baron. They have Joshua Josephs, who I think is a future superstar on the defensive line too. They've recruited very well on the defensive line because I think that just in general, that's been a focus. And with Rodney Garner, they're going to continue to recruit at that high of a level. So because of that, I think the edge rusher position is one where they don't have to worry at all. I mean, you got other guys that are still there. Shandavian Bradley, Caleb Herring, I believe Tyree Weathersby. Tyree West can even line up on the edge sometimes. He doesn't most of the time. David Hobbs. Dave, I'm just naming off guys that were freshmen that we think all of them have a potential to be a superstar going into the future. And that doesn't even include this upcoming class. Oh, Jason Jenkins is another one. I mean, and that doesn't include this upcoming class where I believe Jordan Ross is in the class, who was a highly touted edge rusher. So I think because at edge rusher, they're definitely ready. And so I think edge rusher and receiver, they can afford to look at intangibles. I'm going to be honest. If Boo Carter was a head case coming in as a recruit, I don't believe he is. We've heard rumors, but say hypothetically he was. I think they make a few concessions for Boo Carter right now because they need help in the secondary.
And I think you make a few concessions for James Pierce, too. I mean, he had the traffic incident, which is nothing serious. But if he had another traffic incident tomorrow, I think he's that good where you don't boot him. And I know
I'm not sure.
I know that sounds insane, but you're not fielding a championship team with a bunch of choir boys. I mean, to me, his issue was in between minor and major. Major to me is like you've got one more strike and you're out. I don't know if that's necessarily a one more strike and you're out situation, but you're right. It depends on the position, and you have to be pragmatic. You can't be altruistic in these decisions. Well, I'm going to stand on my high horse and you're out of here because we're the University of Tennessee and that's what they do. If Nico got a DUI tomorrow, do you think he's gone? Absolutely not.
No, and it's funny because it's funny you bring that up. This was one of the things that unraveled Fulmer was he started making concessions for players he didn't have to make concessions for. Hint, Britton Colquitt. I'm going to keep Britton Colquitt on the team after crashing his car in a DUI when he'd already had multiple issues, and you wouldn't even kick your punter off the team. Come on now. Your punter? Do you really need, I mean...
I think that was I think that's a different issue. I think there are family issues being Colquitt was such a huge part of Tennessee's history, and I think they thought Britton was a good dude that just liked to party too much, which I've been told by one of his ex-girlfriends that was the case. So, Tamarion McDonald, I'm not going to name her as a source. Tamarion McDonald flips too from Ole Miss to Louisville. Yeah. He's a totally different situation, in my opinion. Tyler Baron was a borderline all-SEC player if he had his head on straight, in my opinion. I don't think Tamarion McDonald is a great player. So, to me, I don't care if he really has an attitude issue or not. I know Tennessee could use defensive backs, but I think they were probably cool with him cruising out too. You?
So I wanted to give an overall take on both of these guys real quick. First, I need to address Tyler Baron because I haven't addressed him specifically yet. One of the reasons you won't miss him is, I'm sorry, but like the level of short-sightedness and level of intelligence, if you're Tyler Baron, and I hate to go here, Dave, we talk about tripping over nickels in place in search of millions. Tyler Baron is the worst example of this possible because
totally agree.
Yeah. Let me just break down what's happening here, guys. And I want to break this down clearly. I told you guys yesterday, James Pierce might set the school record for sacks next year. Tennessee, they're designed, and you know this, it is a school designed for edge rushers to rack up stats because of this offensive system, what Rodney Garner does and the scheme Tim Banks runs. If there's one thing that's going to if there's one position that's going to rack up stats, it's edge rusher, even more than quarterback or receiver. You're going to get a lot of sacks. With Nico Iamaleava at quarterback next year, you're going to have even more chances because so many teams are going to throw it. Tyler Baron had a chance to get like 12 sacks next year, while James Pierce got 16 on the other side of it. We were talking generational season if he stayed. And he threw that away for NIL money in his senior season, which is so dumb. I can't honestly process it. I don't know how good Tennessee's going to be next year, but I knew Tyler Baron was going to rack up stats and make himself a top 5, a top 3 round NFL draft pick. So this is so next level dumb. And then he goes from Ole Miss to Louisville. And then now Tamarion McDonald, I don't mind him following NIL because he's not going to the NFL, Dave. He needs that NIL money. But Tyler Baron is next level dumb. But here's where I'm at. Ole Miss gets them both and loses them, and it's clear they're following NIL money. Do you think Ole Miss wrote some NIL checks they can't cash with Lane Kiffin in the portal?
I think that's a real possibility. Yeah, and let's dive into that. First, your thoughts, because you gave a great wrap up on Baron, but thoughts on McDonald. Because where I stand is that if he so much as jaywalked, I wouldn't care if he left. And
I think McDonald is smart to follow NIL money because there's never going to be NFL money for him. So take the NIL money. So he's a player that I'm like, you know what? Follow the NIL. Because the NIL, he'll make more NIL than he ever will NFL. Sorry.
Wow. But that's different from certainly Tyler Baron. But as a big picture thing, do you think the roster, and I know it depends on position, but all things being equal, and they're not, I'm asking you an impossible question. Is Tennessee's roster able to give up a borderline all-SEC player to make sure that their team culture, and which I think is excellent, to make sure that their team culture it remains strong? Are they at that point, or could they use another year of bringing some guys in?
They are not at that point at most positions. They are at that point, though, at edge rusher, probably defensive tackle, and probably wide receiver. I will also say, though, the only reason they're at those points, the only reason they're at that point at defensive line, I'm going to be honest, is partially because you bring him up. Rodney Garner establishes that culture. I mean, who is a defensive tackle on Tennessee's roster, Dave, that you don't think is just a good dude and like a very committed player that has the right head on and attitude to everything?
On Tennessee's roster right now?
At defensive tackle, yeah. There's nobody that does not have their head on right.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Yeah, they are very good with their chemistry. Amari Thomas is, I don't know if he's the best defensive tackle. I think he's a great leader. And I think this may be a big reason why I heard, and you heard some reports, I heard that Tennessee kind of backed off going after Walter Nolan, specifically because of this, that they had such a good culture on the defensive line that they didn't want to mess with it.
I wouldn't be stunned. Also, the dollars. Again, Tennessee is in a position where they've had to pay a lot of their players just to stay. I wouldn't be surprised if they backed off Walter Nolan because I think he wanted to get paid. I think that's why he went to A&M in the first place. At least that's the way I see it. Speaking of the way I see it, I see without contacts or glasses. Thanks to Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Haun. Enjoy life better when you see better. Local vision service for LASIK, cataract surgery, and regular eye examination. ccteyes.com, ccteyes.com. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tyler Baron's career. My prediction is he makes it into the NFL. He has some sort of issue with a contract. He has some sort of issue with the coach he's playing for. And he's a one contract player in the NFL. Because I think he has the ability. But this flipping school to school to school, especially you're leaving Rodney Garner. My goodness, that's like a defensive back leaving Saban in his prime. It might be hard, but if you get through it, I mean, there are all kinds of advantages to getting through a Nick Saban coaching or Rodney Garner coaching. That's what just befuddles me. I kind of look at it like this. When you go to college, when I went to UT, the first 2 years, I don't know about you, Caleb, were awful. You had to take, good Lord, chemistry and calculus too, and all this stuff. And it was awful. And then the last 2 years were more about your major, which was broadcasting and communications. I look at it like that. I busted my butt for 2 years and stuff I hated and had to force myself to get up and get out of bed and go to class because I didn't care about these subjects. But then the last 2 years and the following career have worked out for me. And Tyler Baron was under Rodney Garner and had a chance to develop. I think that's what's so frustrating.
I agree. And it's funny because you always see in college, there's people their last 2 years, and it was me too. You always party really hard your freshman and sophomore years. Then your last 2 years, you're much more studious. It's because you want to be more studious, because you love what you're doing with your work. And I agree, this is so short-sighted by Tyler Baron. And, you bring up a point. I was thinking about not paying attention to character and intangibles. And better than me, when Lane Kiffin was at Tennessee with that one recruiting class, he did not care about intangibles whatsoever when he brought in that recruiting class. And now he's doing the same thing at Ole Miss, not caring about intangibles. And again, Ole Miss is writing NIL checks they can't cash. I've gone from last week thinking Ole Miss had a title contender. Dave, I think this is all going to implode at Ole Miss now. I do. I think Lane Kiffin is going for a home run, and he's going to strike out. And you tell me if you think I'm crazy.
I think you could be right.